Welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. Laurie and I are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
I'm Andrew Seidel, FFRF's Director of Strategic Response. FFRF's Ask an Atheist is back after a little hiatus. We are live on Facebook Wednesday at noon Central. And as always, ask your questions right there in the comments or email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
And this week, I don't know which camera I'm on. This week, we will remember Isaac Kramnik, who is co-author of The Godless Constitution and Godless Citizens in a Godly Republic. Very sadly, Isaac Kramnik died December 21st. He was age 81. We were very fortunate at FFRF to get to meet Isaac Kramnik and hear him speak at our national convention this past October.
And after that short remembrance, we are going to talk about FFRF's major complaint last week, which is still making national news. FFRF's legal director, Rebecca Markert, contacted the IRS and urged it to investigate a Florida megachurch and the pastor after he invited members of his congregation to attend a political rally for President Trump held at the church.
And we're going to report on what President Donald Trump said at that rally last Friday, including seeing a few of the video clips.
But first, we memorialize Isaac Kramnik, who is the Richard J. Swartz Professor of Government Emeritus at Cornell University. He was a beloved Cornellian professor, a highly acclaimed historian of British and American political thought. He wrote about the Enlightenment, and he wrote about the Federalist Papers, but he became one of my personal heroes when, with Larry Moore, he co-authored the classic book, The Godless Constitution, A Moral Defense of the Secular State, and he wrote that in 1996. And Andrew, I know this book is very special to you as well as to me.
It is very special to me. I've got my signed copy here. This is actually, it's a well-thumbed and annotated copy as well. I mean, without this book, I wouldn't be here at FFRF. This really, it was formative for me. I read this during law school when I started really getting involved with the First Amendment and state church separation, and it was an eye-opening book for a young law student to read.
And it's been on my bookshelf above my computer for probably close to 30 years.
And Isaac Kramnik and Larry Moore followed that book up last year with the book Godless Citizens in a Godly Republic, Atheists in American Public Life, which is why we invited them to both speak at our annual convention. Let's look at some clips from Isaac Kramnik's talk in which Isaac discussed how God got into the Pledge of Allegiance.
Changing the pledge in 1954 was an establishment and sponsorship of religion because it marries religion to citizenship. Being religious, believing in God, is declared in the pledge to be central to what it means to be an American, and becomes a litmus test for citizenship. It is the creedal core of an American civil religion, a merging of the political and the spiritual. The court is saying that to be an American, one must be a believer. Affirming a religious identity is here taken as the sign of being a good American. Reciting the Pledge of Allegiance is, as many of you know, the last ritualized act in the naturalization ceremony for new citizens, which makes it clear that affirming loyalty to America requires asserting a belief in God, even if God is so allied with the United States that the courts could see God as a secular figure. I repeat, it signifies that what defines an American is being a believer, and that non-believers are unwelcome in the American political community. Now, I have to end this rather sad story of where the Pledge of Allegiance is today with a bit of comic relief. The late iconoclastic comedian Robin Williams, like millions of non-believers and like many in this room, remained unpersuaded about America's dependence on divine guidance. If he could, he would tell audiences repeatedly, he would yet again rewrite the Pledge of Allegiance, this time with less attention to religion and more to geography. And so he would often, in his appearances, offer a new Pledge of Allegiance. And I quote it: "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under Canada and above Mexico, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." Thank you.
So I was thrilled that I got a chance to interview both Isaac Kramnik and Larry Moore for Free Thought Matters, which is our TV show, and actually that has already aired. There's Larry Moore and Isaac Kramnik, and I got a lovely letter from Isaac Kramnik after the convention thanking FFRF, and I had told him they were my heroes, and he said FFRF was his hero. It was very sweet.
It's really sad, isn't it, to watch him speaking and he's so alive and then suddenly
But you can
we're
still
gone.
watch him. You can still, he lives on in his books and in our memory, and you can watch the Free Thought Matters interview with him on FFRF's YouTube channel. I think we have a photograph of that. Do we not, Bruce?
Well, and this was also one of the highlights for me, was at our convention. I got to have dinner with him. This is one of the great things about going to the FFRF convention. You get to meet all these people who are your heroes. And I got to sit down and have dinner with both of them and their wives and tell them about how Liz, my wife, also an FFRF attorney, she's actually the one who gave me this book for the first time. She had read it in undergrad. And I got to tell them how influential it was, and it was what really kind of pushed me into looking more at this as a possible career path. And it was really
Did you
wonderful.
quote them in your book?
I do.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
And then, of course, here he was 81. Larry Moore must be close to an octogenarian if he's not. They could be resting on their professional laurels.
Yeah.
But last year they put out that new book that was really championing the rights of nonbelievers from an academic point of view, a dispassionate point of view, about how downtrodden nonbelievers are in our country and the godless citizens in a godly republic. And there's a large chapter in it with lots of information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, but working to the very end for civil liberties and making sure that history reflects non-believers as well.
And pointing out the fact that we godless citizens are a growing minority, and I think the non-religious now are at 26%, and we're atheists and agnostics, maybe half of that in this country. So it's a growing
9%.
9%.
So we are very sad, but we certainly celebrate Larry Kramnik and all he did in his life.
Isaac Kramnik.
Isaac Kramnik.
And Larry Moore.
Larry Moore.
Confuse those two.
Yes. Now let's turn to the big news for FFRF in the past week. You may have heard that Donald Trump held a campaign rally in the King Jesus Ministry in Miami. He was introduced by evangelist Paul White, who's one of the new faith-based advisors Trump has appointed. And then a number of evangelists prayed over Trump on stage. And let's start with this remark by Reverend Maldonado, who is pastor of the church where the rally took place. We've got a clip of part of his opening prayer.
We ask you, Father, that he can be the Cyrus to bring reformation, to bring change into this nation.
So that's Pastor Maldonado. He's Cuban, isn't he? Isn't that like a Cuban church in Miami?
Honduran.
Honduran.
Oh, he's Honduran?
But
Okay.
a lot of his congregation are Cuban Americans.
So that's why they held that in Miami, to try to attract Hispanics. And this is not relevant at all, but Maldonado, his last name in Spanish, is really something of an insult. It kind of means poorly endowed or a weakling or a stupid person. But some of the things he was saying actually were pretty stupid. When you saw,
What's the Cyrus? I mean, you know the Bible really well.
well, Cyrus. Okay, he was talking about Cyrus. Cyrus was the king of Persia. He's also called Darius.
Okay.
And in the Old Testament, you'll hear reference to Cyrus or Darius. And Persia invaded Babylon at the time when the Jews were being held captive in Babylon in the 5th century BC. So the Jews were captive. They were taking away from their Israel. That's according to the Bible. Taking away from their own temple, and they were not allowed to worship God. And so they were in deep despair and mourning. And then Persia invades Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. And Persia comes in and conquered Babylon, and Cyrus said, hey, this is none of our business. Let the Jews go back home. So they did. So Cyrus let the Jews go back home out of captivity back to Israel to rebuild their temple. So the Jews consider Cyrus to be a big hero of theirs, even though Cyrus was not a Jew, not a believer, was a pagan. He worshiped a false god. And even though he was not one of them, they still revere Cyrus as their redeemer. So modern evangelicals, some of them are saying, well, Donald Trump is our Cyrus. He's really not one of us. He's not a really good believer. He's not a very good Christian, but he is setting us free. He's enacting all these laws and policies that are good for us. So for Maldonado to call Trump a Cyrus is something of an insult to Trump. Meaning, we evangelicals, we know he's really not one of us, but we're welcoming him because he's doing good things for us.
Now, that's pretty interesting. Now, you may also have heard about FFRF's complaint to the IRS asking it to investigate the El Rey Jesus Church because the church's pastor and the self-proclaimed apostle, Guillermo Maldonado, whose name we just heard and who you just saw praying there, he actually urged his congregation to attend Donald Trump's political rally at the church on January 3rd. He told them, if you want to come, do it for your pastor. That's a way of supporting me. And we actually have a clip of the coverage of FFRF's complaint that was done by the local CBS station in Miami.
And it shows Rebecca Markert, our legal director, who made that complaint.
Yes, and a nonprofit organization says the church is knowingly going against IRS regulations. They say the church is only tax exempt provided they do not participate in any political campaign activity. Amid impeachment backlash and a looming trial, President Donald Trump is headed to a Florida megachurch in hopes of gaining support for a 2020 re-election. The Evangelicals for Trump event hosted at King Jesus International Ministry will round up evangelical supporters from across the nation. But a nonprofit group says the church is knowingly going against IRS rules by hosting the event inside its walls. According to 501c of IRS regulations, a church is tax exempt provided they, quote, not participate in any campaign activity for or against political candidates. Rebecca Markert, legal director of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, explains.
We received a report that the pastor of King Jesus Ministry Church encouraged his congregants to attend a political rally that was organized by the Trump campaign. That is a violation of the IRS regulations, which prohibit churches and other nonprofit organizations from engaging in political campaigns.
This is video from inside the church 4 days after Christmas. Pastor Guillermo Maldonado heard persuading church members to side with President Trump.
Es el único presidente.
It's been the only president that has opened his heart to listen to the pastors.
De lo que él haga.
The decision of what he does is not mine, but at least we can talk, we can pray, we can influence, and after everything, the blessing comes to the people. Markert says that crosses the lines between church and state.
That really shows to the congregants that he's supportive of the Trump campaign. And if he was true about being nonpartisan, then we would expect he would then invite the soon-to-be-known Democratic candidate to come and speak at his church later this year.
And a spokesperson for the church responded to the claim to CBS 4, writing in part, "We agreed to lease space in exchange for fair compensation. Our agreement to provide rental space is not an endorsement of President Trump's campaign or any political activity." In Southwest Dade, Amber Diaz, CBS 4 News Tonight.
So, do you want to comment a little bit more about the legal complaint we made?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great complaint. The Johnson Amendment is very clear. It's a very popular rule. 80% of preachers and religious people in the United States support this rule. It simply says that we want charitable donations to go to charitable work. We don't want them to go to political campaigns. The whole idea is that a nonprofit must remain nonpartisan. Which is one of the reasons that on this show we're always offering disclaimers when we get into waters that might seem political, that FFRF, we are a nonpartisan organization. We don't get involved in partisan
because
politics.
We could jeopardize our own tax exemption if we did.
Yeah, and it's a great rule to have in place. It makes sense from a number of different standpoints. It's a very popular rule, but there's a small vocal minority that is trying to get the rule overturned.
And I think we should explain, and you can't be too clear about this, that when you are a tax-exempt group, you're basically being subsidized by the public because you do not pay taxes, therefore other people pay more. And it's because you're supposed to be doing educational work, or in the case of churches, religious work. And so when you get tax-deductible dollars coming in, if you can use that for politics, then that makes an unfair playing field. And churches become political PACs, and as we all know, they don't file Form 990 tax returns with the government.
So no accountability.
They're black holes, so there's no accountability. And so that's why the religious right is actually gunning for the Johnson Amendment. They would like that to happen. I would call it not dark money, but stained glass money. So there's a really good reason why we have this rule. And now, I don't know which is coming up next. Do we have the footage of Trump talking about the Johnson Amendment?
We do. We have Trump actually in the church, and this touches right on FFRF's mission. This is him talking during the political rally, and it directly impacts FFRF's mission. So we're going to watch two different clips. The first one is about the IRS getting rid of the Johnson Amendment, according to Trump, and then the second one is about school prayer, which is, they're both in our wheelhouse.
Let's comment on the first one before we do the second.
So we'll go ahead and show that.
But we're going to get rid of the Johnson Amendment, and we did. It's no longer effective.
So
He said we're going to, and we did. So which is it?
And then he said, and then I'm going to make it permanent. This is just a short clip. But so FFRF is uniquely situated here to point out that the Johnson Amendment hasn't been repealed, despite the fact that Trump keeps repeating this lie. Because what did we do, Andrew?
We actually sued him. So he passed an executive order on the National Day of Prayer, his first National Day of Prayer when he was in office, saying that he gutted the Johnson Amendment. The language he used at the prayer breakfast was, we're going to totally destroy the Johnson Amendment. And he filed an executive order, signed an executive order saying he had done this, basically. And FFRF sued that very same day, saying, this is impermissible, this is illegal, your executive order is out of bounds. And the Justice Department actually went into court in that case and said, yeah, his order doesn't do anything. The executive order does nothing. I mean, we have the Washington Post headline here on the screen. The administration's lawyers went into court, the Justice Department lawyers, and said, yep, Trump was lying.
Yeah, a president cannot overturn a law.
Correct.
By executive fiat. That they can do some executive orders that interpret law, but they can't overturn a law.
Yeah.
But his executive order was advising the IRS to back off, basically.
Well, to not enforce.
Against churches. And that's exactly what his lawyers went into court and said. It does not do that.
Yeah.
But ever since we won that, when we had to drop the case because we got those two documents filed saying he didn't overturn the Johnson Amendment, and we have those on our website. But Trump keeps saying this over and over. So why should we be surprised that Maldonado would then do this unconstitutional, violative action of encouraging his congregation to go to a political rally?
Because even though he didn't do what he said he did, believers think he did. And I have some former Christian friends, and I met some earlier last year, who told me, Trump got rid of the Johnson Amendment, churches can now politic. They actually believe that, and he's repeating that in this rally. And so regardless of the facts, there's a lot of pastors who are now emboldened, thinking they now have this freedom.
Well, and that's going to be a rude awakening for them one of these days.
So our complaint to the IRS, we're never going to know what happens with that, are we?
Well, they might issue a public statement at some point.
Well, the complaints and the investigations are confidential. The only way we would know if something happened, well, first, the IRS will confirm to us that they received a letter and that they're looking into it. But the only way that we'll know that anything happened is if the church says something publicly, or if the IRS does something that lands the church in court, which could happen too.
Or that they say the church has lost their tax exemption.
But even then, we might not know about it unless the church
in the past, the
itself said
IRS
it.
used to periodically issue press releases on various 501c3 groups who had lost their tax exemption, usually just temporarily. But they're so underfunded these days that who knows?
They just cut another 20%
So if that
off
church someday shuts down and becomes a bowling alley, that might be one sign, right?
That would be a good sign.
So then we were going to comment on another remark by our president.
Very soon I'll be taking action to safeguard students and teachers' First Amendment rights to pray in our schools. We're doing a big action. Attorney General Bill Barr.
So No, this was new to me, and I know you were out, but I asked the legal staff, is there something I don't know? Usually there's a hint that there's going to be an executive order coming down from Trump. He likes to talk about them in advance. So we don't know whether he just threw that out there or whether something was really already in the works, but apparently Bill Barr will be issuing some kind of executive order. And this was in the context of Trump attacking the ACLU for taking a lawsuit in Tennessee against football prayer. So it was right after that remark. Mm-hmm. So we are waiting to hear what's coming down.
Yeah, we're watching this very closely. We're not exactly sure what form it will take. One reason we were able to sue so quickly on the previous executive order the day he signed it was that they had teased it enough. We knew what the content was going to be, so we were able to get it actually filed within an hour of the executive order being signed.
That was pretty quick.
But I suspect this will be the kind of thing that we'll have to see how it is interpreted and what the conduct is after he...
Well, and I think the key thing is he said it. He said it's your First Amendment rights. These rights kids can already pray in school. There's that old joke, Dan, you like to tell it. So does...
As long as there are math tests, there will be prayer in school.
Yeah, and you and Jamie Raskin both love this joke.
But they can't be praying over the intercom. It can't be part of a function of the school. They can't disrupt the class, obviously.
Exactly.
Get up and shout out the Lord's Prayer. But they can pray privately to themselves. And if they have a Bible club in a school, they can meet during those times, etc. So there's no problem, and there's 65 plus years of Supreme Court precedent against any kind of religious instruction or ritual in the public schools.
And especially at public school sporting events like football games, which is a big issue that our legal staff deals with a lot, isn't it?
And graduations. Yeah, we don't want to see the government organizing and imposing the prayer. We want to see it to be a genuinely organic student event, not an event really, a student prayer where they're sitting there and saying before their lunch for the day, sitting down and saying a little prayer to themselves. We don't want to see the government involved in any way, shape, or form. And teachers and coaches and schools are the government.
And school functions.
So what could Barr say? I mean, what could they do?
Well, it may be another order that is meant to seem like it does something and really does nothing. Yeah. I mean, to me, Trump said in that clip, to protect your First Amendment rights. The First Amendment rights. That already says whatever they're planning is not going to do anything that the Constitution doesn't already do.
And I am reminded of the executive order that Clinton launched on expression, religious expression, and it involved public schools and it involved federal employees. Mm-hmm. And it just basically laid out the law. And so maybe that's what they're going to do.
Well, we shall see. I'm not.
Do we have one more clip?
given some of their previous things.
I wanted to say one more thing here. That church is called El Rey Jesus, King Jesus Church. And in the United States of America, we don't have a king. We fought a revolutionary war to get rid of a king, a lord, a master above all of us. And maybe some of our current politicians think we still have kings in our country, but that's very un-American to go into a church that's called the King Jesus as a president of all the United States.
And this is one of 5 such churches. This is the big flagship church, but in the Miami area they have 5 of these. And Maldonado, I did a little research on him, not only claims that he can do faith healing and he can scare away the hurricanes, but he also has
The government should hire him, right?
Right, that he has raised somebody from the dead in a morgue. This is who Maldonado is.
Wow.
Well, we have a lot of questions today, I think because people are interested in this tax-exempt issue. So, but Carrie McMahon asks, where can I watch that speech of Kramnik and Moore from the FFRF convention?
So you can go to our YouTube channel, FFRF, just go to videos and Google FFRF, and our playlist comes up for Free Thought Matters, also for Ask an Atheist. And you should be able to find that easily. There's also, his speech is also up from our convention, and that's up at our website, ffrf.org/convention. And you can scroll through the list to find him in alphabetical order, and you can watch his actual speech, the whole thing, at the convention.
Or you can hear it on the radio show this week.
We're playing it in memorial.
Isaac Kramnik's part of the speech we play on Free Thought Radio this week.
Which we're recording tomorrow.
And Lauren is telling me that you can get directly to the speech by going to ffrf.us/godless citizens. And then all the Free Thought Matters episodes are ffrf.us/playlist. Zoe Simmons asks, has the IRS ever actually revoked a church's tax-exempt status for violating the Johnson Amendment?
Yes.
Yes.
But I should hasten to add that usually when they do that, it's just for the donations that came in that previous year or from the point that they got the letter. You know, it's like the next year they can go forward. They haven't actually usually been revoked and having to start all over again. It's usually more like a penalty thing. But again, they are very secretive, and all the investigations are private, so we only know what they tell us. But it used to be much more common.
And I think it's important for people to understand, too, that even if there's not enforcement, having the rule in place is important. It's like speed limits. So, you know, there may not be a cop sitting at every speed limit sign, but having that rule in place still does a lot to control people's speeding.
I think also it's interesting to note that People for the American Way had lost their tax exemption just for this brief period because it was considered that they spent too much money advertising against Bork's nomination. So usually it's a corrective action and they don't go out of business. It's just, you know, like a penalty, and they're told you can't, those people who gave that year are not going to be able to exempt that donation.
So how would
they go forward?
How would they enforce that? They would have to go to an individual tax return and say,
Yeah.
you claimed this deduction, which is not allowable.
They might have to tell their donors about it.
Yeah.
You know, for a certain period you can't claim it, and then they've done their due diligence. So it's really a wrist slap, but it's a very important wrist slap.
It is, and the rule itself is even more so. Now, when we posted the press release on social media, we actually got a ton of debate in the comments section. We had a few questions that popped up there. So Hugh Murris said, how is that event any different than liberal politicians having rallies at churches? I know this has happened in my town before. What can I do to stop them?
Well, unfortunately, in my opinion, candidates can give speeches in churches. They can't supposedly do a political speech, but they can be invited to address a congregation. They can also be invited as a forum, but in that case, they should be inviting everybody. When they invite one person, then they should say to all the candidates, you can come here. And, you know, I think this is very gray area. I don't like it, but it's okay.
There are a lot of bad rules that are associated with this.
But what's different about this one is that the Maldonado from the pulpit repeatedly urged his congregation to go to the political rally that was being held in their church. And now they're saying that the Trump administration rented the facilities, and we are going to be looking to see whether that shows up in their campaign expenses.
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head there. The key legal issue is the pastor saying, as a pastor of the church, I want you to come to this political rally, because that's very clear who he wants his people to vote for. And then there's a second issue where if they are providing this space, it's a 7,000 seat church without charging the campaign, then that could be a financial contribution, so that could also be a partisan political issue. Now, and the church has tried to address that second one by saying, well, the Trump campaign actually rented the space, and as you said, we are going to be following up on that to the extent that we're able.
But the people who go to that church Sunday after Sunday, they go and they sit in those pews, and there's their pastor. Now they're coming to this event at that same church, the same pews, the same pastor, up there praying at this political event. Obviously, it looks like there's a connection there. It's not just, hey, we're opening our church up to some random group to come in here.
And that is what the IRS is looking for. Are you making it clear who you want these people to vote for, or how you want people to vote?
And I am pleased that Rebecca's letter and our complaint has gotten tremendous national attention. It's still getting that attention. Some of it is from the right wing, but Newsweek, Miami Herald, all over the
New York Times,
MSNBC are noting our complaint. It was very important that we lodged that complaint, and there was a lot of attention to it. And then there was a lot of attention to the actual rally, and I can say factually that there was a lot of attention to the fact that Billy Graham's granddaughter, Sissy Graham, something or other, was there. And there was, of course, that was considered to be a way to balance the fact that the editor of Christianity Today, Mr. Galley, had issued an editorial in favor of the impeachment, which in fact a tax-exempt group can do. But the religious right was horrified. And since Billy Graham started Christianity Today, they made a point of inviting her to come up. So there were a lot of things going on.
There's a lot
Shouldn't
going on.
we finish addressing his question by saying that we would complain no matter which political party was involved, whoever it was, Democrat or some other party in that same situation, we would make the same complaint.
Not only would
And
we have.
We have.
Yeah.
And we complained about Hillary Clinton. And it's something that happened during that campaign. We've always complained, even-handedly. And we've always asked presidents, no matter what their party, not to put their hand on the Bible and swear so help me God when they're inaugurated, for example. We've always gone after any president's actions that entangle religion and government.
We sued Obama over the National Day of Prayer, for example. So.
Now, Alex Carpenter asks sort of a broader question. Can't any private organization or campaign collect donations for whatever cause they want? It's like how churches raise money for other causes. I don't see a difference if it's for candidates. I thought that if they're not using the donations for the church, it's legal for them to do that. And the answer to that is no. This is a broader question about the Johnson Amendment and why we have it, I think is what he's getting at.
Yeah, churches cannot raise money for candidates.
Yep.
They can't serve as a conduit. They can't get involved in partisan politicking unless they don't want to have tax exemption.
Yeah, and there are perfect organizations that you can form under the IRS code if you want to be involved in politics. But 501c3s and charities are meant to be doing charitable work, not political work.
When I write a check to a political candidate, I can't deduct that on my taxes each year. That's a 501c4 organization. But what if I write a check to FFRF?
No, a candidate is just a political organization.
Yeah, I know.
Not
So,
even a lobby.
Not a C4, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it's just a political. But if you write it to FFRF or a church or a nonprofit, you can deduct that. So that's blurring the line. That would turn a church, that would turn any nonprofit into a political conduit then.
And it goes to what you mentioned earlier, the stained glass money. There's a serious problem because churches don't report any financial information. You could have billions of dollars flowing through churches to political campaigns, tax-free, and nobody would have any idea where that money is coming from.
Yeah, it'd be political money laundering.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do want to say that we just showed a couple little short clips of Trump, but one of the things that he did in talking about the Johnson Amendment is repeat this other lie that pastors are muzzled. They're not allowed to get involved in politics, and that's not true. Maldonado can endorse as a private citizen Donald Trump. He can even show up as his own person at rallies and so on. But he can't use the machinery of a tax-exempt organization or his position there, saying, I represent the church.
Exactly.
He can say he's a reverend. He's got complete free speech rights.
I think that's a really great point. That dichotomy we should have addressed sooner. He can sit around the dinner table or on his personal Facebook say, I endorse so-and-so. It's when he's using, as you said, the machinery of the nonprofit that it becomes a problem.
I mean, he can put his name on letterhead and send it out to people. He just can't use the church list or church money to do that.
Or church letterhead.
Right.
And so we've got one final comment. It's from Justin Scott in Iowa, a fantastic activist out there. Justin said, it's quite scary how many pastors and church leaders I run into across Iowa that aren't even aware of what the Johnson Amendment is, how it protects them, and why it needs to be defended. I think secular America should come together for a campaign to educate our religious neighbors and faith leaders. And I mean, that is something we've been trying to do for a long time.
And we do have a brochure up online. If you go to ffrf.org and look for publications, you can download it for free. We also have it available in our shop that goes into all the details about why we need to keep the Johnson Amendment.
Well, I'm sure all the pastors in Iowa are watching this show today.
Well, there is one thing that's really helpful. I heard from a pastor who said, I like the Johnson Amendment because if my biggest donor comes to me and says, I want you to vote for X, and my second and third biggest donor come and say, I want you to vote for Y, I can point to the Johnson Amendment and say, look, I can't get involved in politics, and I don't have to take that stance, and it keeps political divisions out of my church.
Yeah, I mean, politics would sully the church. And in fact, that's why so many church leaders actually support the Johnson Amendment. They know how divisive it would be.
And not even all evangelicals support Trump. So how could a pastor get up? My brother Tom, for example, a great guy, very smart, very kind person. He's a conservative, born-again Christian, but he's not a supporter of Trump, even though many of his friends and congregants in the church are. So how could the pastor get up and tell him who he should be voting for?
Yeah, well, that does it for our questions, and I think that does it for our episode.
Well, so we thank you for watching Ask an Atheist, and if you're a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, thank you. And if you're not, we would love to have you join us at ffrf.org, or you can ask for more information or a sample of our newspaper. Just go to Freedom from Religion Foundation's website, ffrf.org, click on the Ask for Info link, and we'd be glad to send you more information about our activism.